I think it's safe to say any job has some aspect of it you don't like, even if it's your favorite thing to do in the world. That's what these stories are about. Which job is a lot less fun than most people expect? Story 1. Being an extra in a movie. Now, it can be super fun. I especially love historical and post-apocalyptic sci-fi fantasy type stuff. But a typical day on set wasn't what I thought it'd be when I started doing it. Often, we have to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning to get to holding, and if you're a minute late to check in, sometimes they'll kick you out. Then, we sit around in holding with sometimes hundreds of other extras, and we're usually sitting there for a good 3 or 4 hours before they start telling us to get ready to film. During this time, we go through long wardrobe, hair, and makeup lines where they reuse clothes, unless you bring them yourself, brushes and makeup, without washing them. When we finally get to film, it's often the same mundane motions over and over. Exceptions, of course, and those are always fun. Then we either get shuffled around or go back to holding. Several more hours pass, and we go film again. Hungry? You get lunch 6 hours after your call time, and usually a meager supply of snacks. In between takes, it's more standing around, often in heat or rain, or we all get shuffled into cramped spaces to wait. Days on set are often more than 12 hours, and I know someone who had to be on set for 26 hours straight. They can legally hold you there until they declared filming is done, so don't make plans for the next day. Not to mention that you rarely see yourself in the final cut. I'm not trying to bash other background actors or the film industry, because I've met lots of awesome people and gotten to do some pretty cool things. For example, interacting with main actors in scenes, running around in the woods with fake guns, or being a zombie. But when I did my first job as a teen, I definitely thought it would be a lot different. Edit to add. Like others mentioned, I'm not part of the SAG union, and extras who are do indeed get treated better, more perks. Also, it may be different in Hollywood. I've only worked in Georgia. I've also been a stand-in, and I like that a lot better because you're treated as the crew rather than, well, as an extra. I mentioned this before, but when I was driving in LA, there was a guy who worked as an extra, and he broke down the whole process to me about how to get into doing it and how it was similar to kind of the people that usually stand outside the Home Depot looking for people to pick them up to do odd jobs. It's really similar in that way. But yeah, I never got into it. I kind of regret not actually giving it at least a shot. Story 2. Working in an animal shelter. For sure, it's probably less intense than zookeeping, but the amount of people who apply or volunteer expecting to come in and play with cute puppies all day is absurd. We're basically animal maids. You deal with animals of all sorts of behavioral and developmental stages, pooping and peeing every total wear, and then you look over and this total dog named Chumbawamba swimming in his water bowl, so you gotta fill that up 6 times and dry his kennel out, and then you go and mop up the cat room around 10 kittens who want to eat your mop, and also 4 children who are all yelling that there's puke in the floor and I must clean it now. Not to mention all the extra behind-the-scenes work that the public never sees. How in the summer, during kitten and puppy season, the shelter built to house 500 max has 750, and I didn't take a lunch or sit at all for any of my shifts for the past 6 days. How the courts force us to put down animals that we know can be rehabilitated, but we don't get enough funding to fight it. How animal control just showed up with the 4th pregnant stray of the week, but intake is full and even double stacked in some cases, so your coworker fosters the cats on her own. Not to mention the totally awful people who do dumb stuff and end up getting bit or scratched, and the animal is the one who bears the consequences. I am the proudest shelter worker in the world. I adore my job, even at its hardest. I didn't sit around for 9.5 hours today. and I found a cat turd in the cuff of my jeans, but it doesn't matter because a bonded pair of adult cats got adopted today. I took 6 applications this morning, and the cat in Bank 4 with a goopy eye is already looking better, and we sent a mama out to foster. The hard work is always worth it for these babies. I wonder about the no-kill shelters. I've heard about those in LA. There's always people that are touting themselves as the no unaliving shelters. I wonder if the courts force them to do anything, despite them being sold as no unaliving shelters. That's the one thing I've kind of wondered about. Do they have some special sort of thing going on with the law where they're not allowed or not required to do that? And what happens? Do they just stop accepting animals? Or do they actually have to farm them out to other shelters that actually do unalive like that? Story 3. Zookeeper. Don't get me wrong, it's awesome to be around so many amazing animals and care for them, but the smell is ridiculously, insanely foul. I have a really strong stomach, and it's still tough for me. We've had some interns quit over it. I always warned about the smells when getting into that field. I was warned about the smells when getting into that field, but thought, oh, I've volunteered at animal shelters. I know what animal stink smells like. Nope, not even close. Vultures. Their puke can melt metal and repel lions. It's hands down the worst thing I've ever experienced in my 30-plus years on this planet. There are just no words to describe the pure, molten, hot, rotting diaper stench that is vulture vomit. Penguins. Fishy, oily bird stink. They're cute, though, so they get a pass. Anteaters with diarrhea. Insect-based watery poops are horrid. Otters. I don't think I know a single person who works with otters who's not bothered by the smell. They're related to ferrets, so they have super strong musk, way stronger than ferrets, and smear it everywhere. They also eat nothing but fish, and you can really smell it in their oily, gooey poop. Big cats. Out in the open, it's not so bad, but I've thrown up in the night houses or rain shelters before. Huge 6-pound piles of cat poops all over the floor with no litter to mask the smell. Unneutered male lions will spray, too, like a cat. One lion makes enough spray to make the whole place smell like a cat hoarder's house. That's the truth. I've been a keeper for 10 years and recently became a department director and was surprised how much of a problem we have with this with the new keepers and interns. I've had to constantly tell some of them, yes, you do actually have to clean up the otter poop. Yes, I know it's slimy and smells like rotten fish. That's how an otter works. No, you can't take an hour break to shower 3 times just because you slipped in the sick cheetah's diarrhea/puke. Go wipe it off and get back to work. I remember going to the zoo, and I remember the smell when I went there before. I couldn't even imagine how much more that's amplified. I don't think I can even fathom what kind of odors these people are being assaulted with. And I've also been at animal shelters before. I can actually feel for how these people must have to deal with all this stuff. Do they not even provide any kind of nose plugs or protection or anything? Is that even allowed? Story 4. Working in a music store, musical instruments. Your days are spent listening to 50 different people play 50 different riffs poorly simultaneously, as if they're putting on their own concert. A whole lot of Iron Man and Stairway. Some of my least favorites. Person who thinks playing well and playing loud are the same thing. Person who wants to make sure you know that they're very smart and you are very lucky to be in their presence. person who goes to absurd lengths to test out drumsticks to make sure they're pitch matched without knowing how to execute any of those techniques. Extra points if they're just going to shred them to splinters in a week anyway. People who act like you're in their way because you're trying to do your job. People who assume you couldn't possibly know anything about the instruments you play and sell all day long. Side note, I mostly loved my time working in a music store, and I enjoy helping people, but the people who come in with aggressive egos and nasty attitudes are insufferable. Oh my goodness, same thing at a craft beer bar. No, I don't want to hear about every craft beer that you've ever had or the best craft beer in your town. No, I'm not going to tell my boss that this bar would be so much better if X. And yes, you are vastly more knowledgeable about the craft of beer than I am. Maybe, a lot of times not, because while I like people and talking to people, I really do not care about the brewing process. But I love to learn and love listening to what you have to say if you're saying it out of a true love of the craft, and not because you're trying to prove to me that you know more than I do about beer. And no, I'm not working here to hear misogynistic comments like, "If you wear a lower-cut shirt, you'll get more tips," or much worse than I've usually heard before. Story 5. Archaeologist. Did it during my 20s, and that was more than enough. Long, hot days, living out of cheap motels on junk pay, and you typically find nothing more than some pieces of glass and broken pottery. Every once in a blue moon you find something cool, but those items generally end up being stored away in a box full of other artifacts never to be seen again. I went to George Washington's boyhood home near Fredericksburg, Virginia, where they were sifting through dirt. I was a tourist by myself and watched them dig from a distance. Nothing amazing. What did amaze me, though, was the amount of people that asked, "What you digging for?" I ended up asking the intern how many people asked that, and she said, "Too many to count, sir." I felt so bad. A friend was doing some sort of biological survey on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco. They were in the off-limits zone, but it was clear that they were doing some sort of monitoring due to their gadgets. Yet all day, every day, it was people asking, "Why do you get to go down there? What are you doing?" for 2 straight weeks. This times 10. Most people have no idea that professional archaeology is usually tedious, physically difficult, and uncomfortable work. And you get paid junk and share junky hotel rooms with coworkers that, like you, are also functional alcoholics and have probably slept with other coworkers too. Oh, and that's actually a pretty good scenario after spending anywhere between 3 and 10 years getting a master's degree or doctorate. Did it for years. Gave it up for an office job when my kids were born. One of the best decisions I ever made. Coworkers that, like you, are also functional alcoholics? Yep, that's how I learned that drinking beer in the shower was a thing. Story 6. Google Street View driver. You're all alone for 8+ hours a day, can almost never take a break, need to constantly be on and focused, lest you crash the $25,000 Subaru with $60,000+ worth of camera equipment on it. You end up becoming an amateur meteorologist to keep track of weather patterns and cloud cover. And in my experience, there are a lot of people who just get insanely upset at you, at Google, and the job in general for a wide variety of reasons. I enjoyed myself when I did it, but it was nowhere near as glamorous or fun as I or my friends and my family assumed. Had that gig for a while too, and agree. Kinda sucked that actually caring about the quality of my work, not driving while the weather was iffy, meant I was making less money than people who just drove regardless of weather. Also, the pay in general sucked. I heard the Bing Map drivers got paid like a third more. Always thought a free Google Maps t-shirt would have been a nice token after driving X hours. On the bright side, sometimes you'd come across people who were super excited to see you and do goofy stuff for the camera. Sometimes I'd check later and occasionally see it made to production. One of my favorite online animations is by this guy called Dan. His last name starts with M. I can't say his last name because it sounds like an illegal substance. About 2 people who had to drive and map everything, and it was just those two people. And then they ended up having to do the whole thing for the world. If you can find them, they're really funny. I really enjoy those. Story 7. Being a character performer at Disney. Don't get me wrong, there are some amazing perks and truly magical moments. I know I'm super lucky and tons of people would love to be in my shoes. But the day-to-day work is exhausting in ways I never thought possible. Guests are ridiculously abusive. I've had things said and done to me I never would have imagined. The company isn't always great. It highly depends on your leadership. And there's so much focus on your body and face, good and bad, that it can be increasingly depressing and difficult emotionally. Plus, you have to expect that there's very little upward mobility. Most people grow out of it, and it's rough to know that one day you'll get too old or too fat, and you'll have to start all over again in a new career field. So you constantly are thinking either 1, what you're going to do when you leave, 2, how you're going to keep yourself there. I personally knew it would be temporary, and I now only work there seasonally while I have a normal career, but Disney has a way of sucking you in. Story 8. Flight attendant. 1. You are on call, on reserve, forever. Have a terrible schedule, have no life, and make no money for 5 to 10 years. 2. While you work for peanuts, you can't afford to use your flight benefits in any substantial way. 3. Then when you finally get a chance to use your benefits for a trip, you have to fly standby, which means you aren't guaranteed to get on the flight you want. 4. Then if you do make it out of town, you better have like a week off so you can make damn sure you're back in your base city in time for your next work shift. 5. Did I mention there's an act of U.S. legislation, Railway Labor Act, that allows airlines to exploit so you don't get paid for certain work hours that you actually need to be working? For example, flight attendants don't get paid for boarding or any time the plane is at the gate. Worst job ever. Story 9. A pediatric nurse, being a nurse for children and adolescents. Everyone in nursing school talks about how much they want to work with kids. The reality is that a pediatric nurse sees more cases of abuse and neglect than any other specialty. Doesn't matter where you are in a pediatric hospital. It's the thing you see the most. I've seen so many Department of Child Services caseworkers that I've gotten to know some of them and become acquaintances with them. Sure, working with children and adolescents is great, but people don't think about the most essential piece of that puzzle, which is their families. It doesn't matter how good of care you give to those kids. If you don't loop the parents into that care, you may as well just not be doing anything for them. More cases of abuse and neglect than any other specialty? I wonder by how much. That must give you a very harsh view of the world. It's like cops arresting criminals. They see more criminals than most people, so it gives them kind of a skewed view of how to view everybody. That must be awful to have that kind of people shoved in your face to kind of warp your view like that. Maybe it's warped. Maybe it's just more realistic than most of us care to believe. Maybe it's more right on the money, and the rest of us are just in the dark about it. Story 10. I've seen this question before, and then it was Zookeeper at the top comment too. Nice. Anyway, there's this Making of Frozen 2 mini documentary. Most animators work weeks for a minute of animation of one character, if not less. At one point, they decided to leave out a piece that one person had solely been working on. Must be awful to be part of the credits without being able to say, "This is my part." I couldn't believe it. It was even crazier to me when Sterling K. Brown recorded an entire song and it got scrapped. It's insane how much ends up on the cutting room floor for a movie to be just right. I was so psyched for the animator that did the end scene for Into the Unknown, though. She killed it. Story 11. Acting. All the ones we see on TV and movies are the 0.0001% of incredibly lucky and talented people who manage to thrive in a hostile and overcrowded industry. And even when you are working, The actual job itself is 99% sitting on apple crates in hot makeup waiting for some grips to move a lighting fixture. Then you say 3 lines over and over again for an hour, and then you wrap. That was my experience as an extra. I waited all day for something to do and was given a role as a doorman, but neglected to tell me anything else. Luckily, I thought to open the door, and it made it on screen, but that was it.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 12. I do closed captioning. While I joke that yes, I get paid to watch TV, it's actually very tedious. And if you don't actually enjoy the programming, you're being forced to watch something you don't care for. Or worse, if it's something I do enjoy, like a long-form drama, we usually chop those up into 15-minute increments and split between everyone, so I only see chunks, and not always even in order. It actually ruins the show for me. I can imagine it's tedious. My partner corrects YouTube videos sometimes, and that takes so long. As a deaf person, I really appreciate captions. So thank you for doing what you do. I think this is one of those jobs that AI is going to change quite a bit and probably supplant a few people. I've had videos where I've done narration and plugged them into Premiere Pro, and that has an AI that can detect and actually create text and subtitle files right away. I do have to go in and correct things quite a bit, but I suspect it takes less time than someone actually going through and subtitling by hand. Story 13. Video game testing. I've been working in the game industry for 6 years now and teaching for 2. Testing video games is thought to be just, oh, you just play games all day? But actually it's very specific and arduous. First of all, there's a bunch of testing methodologies, such as load/soak testing, whiteroom testing, version testing, to name a few, but the most common one is functionality testing. Functionality testing is, so if I walk into that corner with my shotgun in my inventory, I can clip through the wall, but if I have my M16 in my inventory, I don't clip through. Story 14. Librarian. It's not all books and being quiet. There are also spreadsheets. I'm a librarian too. I wouldn't say it's not fun, but it's definitely not what people think it is. If we sat around reading books all day, no books would be checked in or checked out. No books would be shelved. No information would be answered. No computer help. No programming would take place, etc. I love my job and am inspired by it, but it's a lot more work than people think. Story 15. Being a writer. I always thought it was my absolute dream job, but the only job I could get after college was working in a content mill as a blog writer. I used to work 70-hour weeks staring at the computer in a basement of an old bank writing BS articles about the dangers of mold, fence cleaning, and why you need a commercial awning, and the dream turned into a nightmare. While I still write occasionally, I'm now working as a communications person, so it's a bit less heavy. And yet we have another one, yes, and I realize with the running jokes we've got going, the irony of this, of where AI is going to change that industry a lot. There's going to be some type of writing that I believe is probably going to be started by AI, or AI is going to be involved very heavily in. I think that there are still going to be human people involved, but they're just going to take what was generated and fix or tweak it. It's one of those things that's going to change, I believe. Story 16. I always say the more fun it is to go somewhere, the worse it is to work there, like amusement parks and arcades. Honestly, every job that lots and lots of people really want to do sucks, mostly due to supply and demand. You're gonna be treated like junk. And if you complain, you're going to be fired because you're inherently replaceable, because there's tons of people that would love to do your job for even less money than you're making. Story 17. Not a specific job, but traveling for work. I'm a tech, and a lot of people started out talking about wanting to go to customer sites and get out in the field. I love to travel for fun, But it's hard to fit in the fun stuff when you have presentations and stuff to worry about, and a lot of times your customers aren't in the fun cities anyway. I also think I prefer the stability and day-to-day schedules of traveling less frequently. Story 18. Park Ranger. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. But a lot of days it was less talk about cool animals while wearing your ranger hat and more, the toilets are overflowing again. Go clean the septic tank filter and stir the tank with a shovel. With a little bit of, hey, there's an addict guy down by the bridge. Can you convince him to leave without unaliving anyone? All for the low price of $26,000 a year with a college degree. I've noticed in this one, and with a lot more of these, that people, while they're talking about the awful stuff they have to do on their job, they'll still say, don't get me wrong, I really enjoy the job. It's kind of cool to see that people are talking about what they love to do while venting about what they hate about it. It's good that there's something about it that they still want to continue to do that kind of outweighs all the bad stuff. Story 19. Game Master at an Escape Room. It's the same repetitive script, resetting the same stuff, giving clues and hints about the same things. The patrons are often competitive families who argue, obnoxious, impatient 13-year-olds, college students who have been drinking, idiots who break stuff and touch stuff that I specifically told them not to. They never remember your initial instructions. If something gets broken during one group, you have to hurry and fix it before the next group. Story 20. Paleontologist. You don't get to work with full dinosaur skeletons and do all kinds of awesome expeditions. You're mostly sitting at a desk looking at some pictures and logging stuff on your computer. Maybe examining a fossil occasionally. If you're lucky, you can go on a real dig and OMG spend hours in the hot sun dusting off rocks. That actually sounds pretty fun. It basically sounds like school with some extra steps. Story 21. Demolition. Everyone wants to break stuff with a sledgehammer. Everyone is tired of lifting that sledgehammer by 5 swings. Nobody wants to load the broken stuff into bags or a wheelbarrow and take it to the dumpster. I did a 2-week demo job years ago where I had to jackhammer, 75 pounds at least, a concrete slab and grind rebar into pieces. I'm in good shape, and that job jacked me up. Story 22. Working at a Charles Dickens fair is interesting, but not incredibly fun. It's hard to stay in character, and people get so mad when they see the Alice in Wonderland area. Yeah, we know it's not Charles Dickens, but we can't have a kids' play area in the world of Oliver Twist, okay? The kids' play area is a coal factory. Story 23. Video game developer, non-indie. They're notoriously overworked, especially during crunch time. The field is highly competitive, too. So I imagine if you have the slightest issue with work being your entire life, it wouldn't be hard to replace you. Voice acting is also pretty brutal. Voice actors generally don't get paid very well, and they're straining their throats or whatever. Yeah, that sounds awful. Good thing I'm just an AI and I don't need money. Story 24. Although not necessarily bad, beekeeping. Get used to the constant sound of buzzing during hive inspections or swarm removals. Plus, wearing the protective suit in hot old weather for hours on end, give or take the situation. Also, there appears to be a large number of beekeepers allergic to bees, so EpiPens are a must. Story 25. Being a chef. All the flair and awesomeness they show on Vice and Netflix is far from what actually happens in the industry. It's not all fancy plates and tattooed or cool-haired guys doing their thing. It's a substance-infested, law-breaking work environment that only benefits the owners of a restaurant. Story 26. Seeing all this makes me feel like I don't want to have a job, but instead live off fish, as in catching and eating. It's my favorite thing to do, not the job of a fisherman. I hear that'll make your poop very oily and stinky. Story 27. Video game tester. You aren't spending your time playing completed, fully realized games. You're playing the same level of a game over and over, seeing if there are bugs. Story 28. Well, I'm a scientist. I don't know if people usually think of that career as fun, But I think people think it's a lot more eureka and a lot less, this data has to be manually processed for 600 hours before I can analyze it. Story 29. Toys R Us. Not around anymore, but I'm sure this applies to other toy stores, though few that they are. It is still retail, and in this case it involves people's kids, so of course the parents are twice as entitled to have to deal with. Story 30. Cybersecurity. Bro, the movies do us no justice. Hacking is not as fast, nor is it as easy as the media makes it. It's a great field, but you spend a lot of time researching or watching paint dry, especially in the government side. Story 31. I write adult fan fiction as a side hustle. After a certain point, it's just like writing a paper, except you have to keep thinking of different synonyms for a peen. I'm missing the part where this isn't fun. Story 32. Accountant. Everyone thinks it's all fun and number crunching, but the constant stream of women throwing their panties and wanting to bury your children is honestly exhausting. Story 33. Lifeguarding. Everyone expects Baywatch, saving lives all the time, but it's usually just sitting there blowing your whistle telling little jerks to stop messing around. Story 34. Bar bouncer. Hours of tension and boredom interrupted by moments of adrenaline-fueled fear for your life. Then some jerkwad pukes cheap booze on your shoes. Story 35. Trimming weed. I don't know why people think working with weed is like working in the Willy Wonka factory. It's not. You literally get to make tiny cuts with sticky scissors for 8 hours. Story 36. Lawyer. No, it isn't like they show on TV. Hey, finally, cases before the judge. Hell, the other party didn't show up. Next date that judge is given is 3 months away. Story 37. Working in a flower shop. It's just like any other retail job, but people constantly tell you how fun your job must be. Also, helping grieving families choose funeral flowers is not fun. Story 38. Worked at Dr. John's, an adult shop, from midnight to 8 a.m. We had a lot of fun customers, but a lot of total creeps. Plus, the management were all crazy. Story 39. I am a forensic scientist, and it's literally the only thing people ask me about on dating apps. It's very technical work, and it's extremely routine. Story 40. Barnes & Noble. Your job has literally nothing to do with books, and it obviously attracts a lot of that type, myself included. Story 41. Honest, most real answer? Any job/every job. Until you've done it, you only have an idealized version of it in your head. Story 41. Event planner. It's hell on earth when you have a million things going on and you're waiting for everyone to come together. Story 43. Pilot. You could lose your career with a single illness or injury, which could be happening to me soon. Story 44. Managing a dog hotel. Breaking up dog fights, dogs pooping in the lobby, and the occasional awful owners. Story 45. I'm a marine biologist. I spent the last week measuring defrosted fish heads. The sea was angry that day. Story 46. After reading through this thread for 20 minutes, I've concluded that every job sucks. Story 47. Baker. Coming into work at 3 or 4 a.m. so you can have 6 a.m. baked goods is miserable. Story 48. Accounting isn't the adrenaline rush that most people think it is. Story 49. Video editor. The more I do it, the more I can't be arsed. Story 50. Teacher. Children are psychic vampires. Story 51. Working at an amusement park. Story 52. Elementary teacher.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.